For anybody who had to leave early yesterday, I do have the meeting recorded from yesterday, so please reach out to me and let me know if you need that. I will make sure to share it with you. And then if it's not, if you're not able to get it on your on Google Drive, I also have kind of a backup YouTube account, which seems to work better for some people's phones for some reason. So cool. Well, we're actually going to get started with a message from Osahan, who has recorded for us and just wants to jump in and give a little bit of his best wishes after our first launch day. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull that up. And here we go. Share sound. So we're just going to hear a bit of his message and some of the things that he's been thinking about for the coming year. And I would love to hear, any reactions or anything that you have in the chat, and then we'll get started with our topic.
Hey, what's going on? Keep Team Osahan here. Guys, just wanted to take a moment to welcome y'all to another year, another school year, right here, right around the corner. Really wish I could be with you guys, but as you guys probably saw in my email earlier this week, that I'll be out this week. What I didn't mention in that email is that I'll be out because I'll be out on paternity leave. My wife, probably by the time you guys watch this, would have had our second son. So, or if not, I'm still waiting for her in a hospital room. It is what it is. But thoughts, good vibes, all those things, prayers, whatever you guys want to shoot our way, well appreciated. But I did want to take a moment, guys, just to share with you guys something that's kind of been stirring around in my brain, looking toward this next school year. For those of you who were with us through most or all of last school year, that was a journey, that was a ride. First year doing Keep in the way that it was done. And this year, there are going to be some changes. There are going to be some things I think that are changes for the better. They're going to help us to do what we do well. But I think it all boils down to the word care. And so just gonna share with you this acronym for care that's kind of been bouncing around in my brain. The first thing is the C in care stands for compassion. My hope is that we be people of compassion as we are walking alongside, and like I always say, we're more than just a homework club. There is a mentoring component. There is an access component that we're providing for the students that we care for. Some of them, maybe it's their families that need care as well, but let us be people of compassion when we are working with the At Promise students and families that we're working with. Even compassion for the teachers and principals. There's some crazy situations going on at your school sites even now, and maybe some folks are still dealing with whatever happened last year. But let's be people of compassion for those that we are working with, both compassion outwardly and also compassion inwardly for each other. Have compassion for your team. School schedules are crazy. I know work schedules are crazy. We're all trying to figure it out. I think it's the psychologist Brene Brown said that clarity is compassion. So let's be clear about our communication with one another. That's an area I struggle with, and I'm going to try to be better. I'm challenging you to do the same. The A stands for availability, and I'm not just talking about work schedules, because I know work, school, all those things, schedules can be crazy. But I mean being present and available when we are at our sites, being present and available when we're in meetings, being present and available when we're in conversations. You never know the value that you just giving attention to a student may bring. Some of our At Promise students maybe aren't getting any attention at home, maybe aren't getting any care or support at home. And so you may be the only person, maybe they've gone through a long school day and their teacher isn't providing it. You might be the only person who provides the care and support that they need. So be available. That's why we say no cell phones out unless you need some emergency communication. So be available mentally. If you're having a hard day, tag a partner in, tag in another tutor, give me a call, give your lead a call, your psych, whatever that looks like, but let's be available. The R stands for resilience. Like I mentioned, if you were with us last year, it was a journey, and resilience is something that I would use to describe and characterize what took place last year, and how all of you who are returning, what I feel you maybe gained a sense of is resilience. But know this, going into this new year, there will be changes. There's going to be things that require us to be flexible and to have a bounce back, nature about us. Think about a rubber band, right? You stretch that thing out and then it
Sorry.
gets right back to its normal posture and position. Let's be flexible. Some of you are going to step into school sites with a brand new principal. That's change that you're going to need to be resilient about. Some of you are going to interact with brand new teachers. It's change you're going to have to be resilient about. New students, change you're going to have to be resilient about. Things are going to happen in your lives, things that you will need to be resilient for. So let's be people of compassion. And I think compassion also gives us a sense of commitment as well. Let's be people who are available, people of resilience. And lastly, let's enjoy what we do. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, come talk to me. Talk to me personally, okay? Because I want you to enjoy what you are doing. Yes, it is work, but we should be able to enjoy it. Yes, it takes a toll on us emotionally, but we should be able to enjoy it. So friends, that's care, compassion, availability, resilience, and enjoyment. And I hope, I know, I'll be with you guys next week for the in-person trainings. Looking forward to those moments and those opportunities. And I hope you guys are able to get and glean some things from the trainings that are taking place virtually over these next few days. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself. I know we haven't thrown out there quite yet, leads and site captains and all that stuff. So please feel free to reach out to me. If I don't get back to you this week, reach out to Lauren, good old assistant supervisor Lauren. Give a hand for Lauren. But if you need anything, guys, please reach out to me and let's figure out a way to make this a year where we can care well for those that we are serving and working alongside, for the At Promise community that we are servicing. Appreciate you guys. Hope to see you guys soon.
And so there is our reach out from Osahan and his idea of care, of compassion, availability, resilience, and enjoyment. I want to open up space in case anybody has any, comments or reactions to that. I know that I was glad to be able to hear from him. And I really like the way that this just I think there's so many different responsibilities that come for everyone on the KEEP team. And I really like the way that this just breaks it down. How do we be compassionate? How do we be resilient? And I also wanted to say that those are learned skills and learned traits and things that, like, if you're not resilient, now, or you don't feel that you are, it's something with every one of these, it's something that you keep building. It's a practice. So I think that we can be people of growth and just, recognize that we're all in different places with this and continue to try and move forward. But I do want to have people share out if they want to, either in the chat or out loud. And I see a few of you who have just come in. Please reach out to me if you need a recording, and I'll also make sure that I share that video so that anyone can kind of go back and look at it after we're done today. Okay, cool. Well, I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to go ahead and start with our presentation for today. We're going to do a quick icebreaker. We've done a little bit of that, but we'll just kind of turn it into a check-in. And all right. No problem. Thank you for letting me know. All right, let's get started. Give me one moment to share my screen. And actually, while I'm sharing my screen, like I said, we are going to be talking about restorative justice and creating that restorative justice mindset, growing that restorative justice mindset these next couple of days. So I would love to hear from you. Feel free to just unmute yourself and share. I asked you to take a little bit of time and think about what have you learned about restorative justice, or how did you practice it at your site? And I'd like to hear from a couple of people while I'm getting ready to share my screen. Don't everybody speak out at once. All right. So I would like to just, can you help me out a little, Amy, and cold call a couple of people to just share out what they learned about restorative justice or what it sort of meant to them at their school site?
Sure. Let's go with Ernesto Cruz.
Hello.
Hi, Ernesto.
Yeah, so I guess at my site, we kind of use this for kind of conflict resolution. Just kind of gathering all parties involved for something that restorative justice could be used for. Not necessarily everything, but yeah. So for example, if they were kind of fighting over, I don't know, scissors, some kids. We'd kind of get them together and see kind of what solutions we can come up with. Usually because they're younger, I try to make them realize what solutions are possible, kind of brainstorming what works for everybody. But yeah, it's kind of smaller issues and we kind of go from there.
Thank you for sharing. And how did that work at your school site? Were there successes?
Yeah, there were, but I know for some situations it didn't really work. Kind of like for fights or serious, things where like maybe
Got it.
they're more serious issues. But yeah, for smaller things and kind of usually things that kids make a big deal out of, they were pretty easy to resolve. The restorative justice method.
Hearing, yeah, that it worked well for like little arguments or disputes, but
Yeah.
when like emotions were maybe more intense, it was a little bit harder to do.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
just kind
Okay.
of things that were out of our control. Can't really tackle that with that approach, but yeah, smaller things, kind of day-to-day things that work.
Got it. Thank you so much for your honesty. And let's have one other share out what restorative justice looked like for you in KEEP last year at your site. Can we do another cold call?
Let's go ahead with Jorge.
Hi, Jorge.
Hello. I remember restorative justice being kind of like that was what we wanted to push them to use to deal with their issues. But however, as we previously mentioned, it was very difficult because their emotions took over almost like at like a rapid pace, and it was always over something like, oh well, today it was basketball day, but we're playing tag. And I'm like, yeah, but you guys chose tag. And then when they start to discuss it between themselves, they try to work it out. But because there's so many different opinions and emotions between every age and friend group, it was more just a practice than it was like the solution they picked.
Got it. So it's like what you wanted to be able to do, but a lot of times when emotions got intense, that kind of got in the way, would you say?
Yeah, perfect way to round it up.
Okay, okay. So what we're going to talk about, we've talked about restorative justice a lot in theory as like, this is the foundation that KEEP is based off of. Today, when we talk about the 5 R's, we're not just going to repeat that. We're going to go in and look at each R and what it means and some of the ways that it might, show up or be undermined in schools as it is, because I think that's what helps that's what helps me at least to think about, okay, if tutoring is going to be following an alternative method, what does that need to look like? How do we make sure that that's different from what's happening in the schools while also, working in partnership? So thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. And we had a little bit of chat. We had a little bit of discussion in the chat. So I'm just going to go ahead and move forward. We do have an icebreaker. Feel free to share what color is your mood today and why, just in the chat, because I do want to make sure that we sort of stay on track today. I think mine is green. I'm pretty calm. Sleepy. What color is sleepy to you, Trinity? Lavender. Oh, cool. All right. So we'll continue on. You can keep sharing. I think it's important when we're talking about these topics or really doing any kind of training. I really want you all to get into the process of checking in with yourself. And sometimes that can be, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, I am a 5 today. But sometimes I think there are other ways to do it. And for me, thinking about, oh, what's the color and why, or one that I like is like, if my mood was an animal, what would it be? Sometimes maybe it's a squirrel scurrying around. It's really just about, building that awareness of how you feel, because a lot of times it's easy to get caught up in, oh my gosh, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And I think sometimes those are the moments when it's most important to slow down. And that kind of ties into what we were talking about just now with emotions taking over for kids. I think as adults, that can happen too. And so it's just a practice. Checking in with yourself is a practice that I really hope people can get into if they're not already doing so. I definitely think that it ties in with what Osahan was saying about care, because I think it's a piece of compassion for yourself as well as availability. And like, I'm going to pay attention to myself on purpose right now. So thank you all for sharing. I see so many different colors in the chat. We're all a rainbow and I love it. All right, moving forward. Oh. What are the 5 R's of restorative justice? Anybody feeling brave and want to name them, or maybe can name a couple? I know we went over this in trainings last year. For those of you who have been with us for the full year. Ray, go for it.
I'm pretty sure it's respect, repair, responsibility, relationship, and forgetting the last one.
You're doing awesome. Anybody?
I think it's reintegration.
It is reintegration. Yeah, good job. Let's give some snaps for Ray. Thank you so much for volunteering. And what is restorative justice anyway? We've talked about a couple of ways that it showed that we tried to that you tried to practice it, or did practice it at your site last year. Thank you for that, Ernesto and Jorge. I'm sorry. So what is it? Does anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I can go.
Please go for it, Indira.
So RJ is used to heal from harm, from like trauma.
Awesome. Anybody want to add to that?
Amy,
It
go
is-
for it.
It's RJ is used to restore both parties in incidents of harm.
Yeah, and can you tell me what you mean by both parties?
So the person who caused the harm and the person to whom harm was done, which in many situations is actually both directions.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would add also that it's a very relational approach to harm. That kind of goes along with what you're saying, that it's not just about, okay, who is to blame and how are they going to be punished? It's really about the ways that people are connected, understanding why the harm happened, repairing it. I think this is review, and I'm really glad to see that even after a couple of months away, that people are really remembering some of this, because that is 100% what we're going to be talking about today. I'm wondering, we're gonna talk about it on the next slide, but I'm wondering if anyone would take a chance with telling me something that restorative justice or RJ is not.
I feel like RJ is not punishing people for what they did, or yeah, just punishing people.
It's
That's
not
what I
punishing
think.
people.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Indira. Yeah, I think oftentimes we talk about like restorative justice and punitive justice, right? Punitive meaning punishment. And so those tend to be like, okay, these are polar opposites. And that's what I'm hearing a lot from your answer. Anybody else want to add? Callan, yeah, please.
I was gonna say, like, it's not where you single somebody out or anything out, because there's, what is the word? There's a lot of intersection between certain issues and people. So if you just single one thing out, it's gonna cloud your vision and you're not gonna make a conscious decision.
Mm-hmm. Say more about what you mean by intersections between issues and people.
Well, sorry, my brain's not gonna work too well today, but I'll do my best.
You're good.
So everybody has a certain set of circumstances that they carry with them throughout the day, and it depends by the day. So you don't know what is affecting their actions, and then you have to remember their past actions, and then you have to remember the situational action of like how the entire class is going through things and how the tutors are going through things. So they all like interweave, and then it's like it's like Jenga, how you would stack things on top of each other. Everything connects all into a tower, and then if you single out one thing, you pull it out, everything falls apart. So you need to take it step by step.
Thank you for sharing that. I really like that metaphor, actually. Because yeah, if you just pull out one brick and you say, this is the one problem, it doesn't necessarily solve what happened or repair the harm. So that's definitely a good way to put it. All right, a few things I'm going to add to this. So that we're all on the same page. I know that people came into KEEP at different times last year, and I want us to all be clear. So things restorative justice is not. One would be, not having discipline or consequences or boundaries. I've heard that attitude before, that like restorative justice is like going soft on people, or, oh, we don't have structure, or, oh, they do whatever they want. And that's not necessarily true. The goal of restorative justice is to develop healthy and relation-based discipline, and address harm and unmet needs. But just because it's focused on that relationship, just because it involves the person who has done the harm or the group that has done the harm, because it could be a group, doesn't mean that it's unstructured. It doesn't mean that you don't have agreements. It doesn't mean that you don't have standards. And kind of to the same thing, it doesn't mean that you're excusing or ignoring problematic behavior or avoiding conflict. I mean, anybody want to take a guess at our motto? Anybody remember what Justice for Youth's mission statement is? All right, I'm going to help you out. So I'll start it, and I want to see if anybody can finish it. We mentor at Promise Youth to become better students. That's one. Good job.
Better people.
Better people. And there's one more.
Leaders.
Better leaders. Yeah. Does that mean that we, if you're trying to help somebody become a better person or a better student, does that just mean that you ignore their problematic behavior or sweep it under the rug or say, oh, this is fine, this is the best they can do?
No.
Thank you. I guess that was really a rhetorical question. Yeah, we want to help people be better and grow. And that doesn't mean just ignoring behavior, and it doesn't mean ignoring conflict. I know that conflict can be scary, I think, for a lot of people. And one thing I've really been trying to work on, and I hope that you are willing to work on it too, is that conflict is a place to lean in and learn from one another and grow, because conflict is change. So without change, growth doesn't really happen. And that's true with students too. If you're having conflict with a student, you might be able to learn something really important from that. Checking the chat. All right. Any reactions to any of this so far? Any thoughts that people want to share? Feel free to raise your hand or go in the chat. And we're going to keep going. I also want to address the idea that like restorative justice is like a new concept or a trend. There is a lot of cool work going on within the social sciences, within counseling, even within some of the like more traditional criminal justice. It's becoming more widely talked about, but it's not a new concept. The idea of involving, an entire community or group in helping to make right a harm that's been done exists in societies all around the world. I found a few examples as I wanted to share these, and I'm happy to find resources if anyone's curious about this. But there are Abenaki talking circles, Navajo tribal courts, elder-assisted hearings for First Nations people in Canada, and Maori family group conferences. So restorative justice draws on a lot of those practices as it's becoming this growing field. And those practices have existed for a very, very long time across multiple cultures. So if you ever hear people say it's a trend, that's not true. It's just becoming a growing field. And then lastly, I just wanted to add this one, that it's also not inherently like religious or spiritual. There are some influences from other faith communities. Nonviolent communication is often used in faith communities. And the Mennonites were a really, really big example of early restorative justice practices. And we also use a lot of language that I think can sometimes feel like it can be rooted in religious values if we're talking about compassion for people. That could sometimes be a charged word, but keep restorative practices are secular. So those are a few things restorative justice is not. And we're just going to start to go through, whoops, I'm so sorry. We're just going to start to go through our 5 R's together today. I really, really encourage participation with this and just genuine reflection as I ask some of these open-ended questions. We're going to look at what each of those R's means for us, because everybody comes in with kind of a different sense of, well, what does respect mean? That's based on what you've learned growing up or out in the world, and everyone has different experiences. So everyone's going to have a different sense of respect, relationship, and so on. So that's the format this is going to follow. I'm going to share a few examples of where this maybe doesn't show up in traditional schools. We're going to discuss them. And we're just going to keep going with that. So any thoughts, comments, anything that people want to share right now, again, always feel free. But with that, I am going to keep going. So actually, before we do our questions, I'd like to do a 3, 2, 1 in the chat and have you share what are the first words that come to your mind when I say respect. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Honor, earned, kindness, compassion, mentors, communication, peace, discipline, kindness, boundaries. Oh, I'm seeing boundaries a lot. Understanding, trust, listening. Awesome. Thank you all. And let's have a couple of people then share out. What does respect look like for you? Just day to day, how do you show respect to people? Give back the same energy you would like to be given. Can you give me an example of that, Abigail? Listening intentionally, not challenging privacy or boundaries. Awesome. Acknowledging people. Showing that you see them. Jose, what does it look like to show that you see people?
Oh crap, my mic's been on the whole time. Just just acknowledging by just like oh man, by like showing them like, hey, like I'm here, like I care for you, like you need something, like I got you, like just showing them they're there. And that you see them,
That sounds a lot like what Osahan was describing with availability in a way.
I showed up a couple of minutes late, sorry.
Oh, no worries. Just like be, what it looks like to be there for somebody. I'll make sure that I share the video. Sorry about that.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Staying calm and polite. Okay, Cassandra. To say more about that, how is staying calm and polite a form of respect? Trust is something respect needs because you have trust in each other to be respectful in your friendship, etc. I love all of the share outs that we're getting in here. I really am hearing this thing about boundaries a lot. So do you want me to come back to you, Cassandra? All right, I will check in with you in a little bit. All right, so let's shift gears then and really focus on a school setting. What does respect look like in a school setting?
Well, for me, respect in a school setting will be if a person speaking, just pay attention to that person. It doesn't matter if it's you as a tutor, as a mentor, or it's the student. You need to pay attention to the speaker. You need to be prepared and be respectful. Know what voice level to use at all times. Just be ready and just read the situation and act accordingly.
Gotcha. Let me try and catch what really stuck out. You said that it doesn't matter if it's you as a tutor or if it's someone else or if it's a student. I'm wondering, how much do you think that shows up in a traditional school setting? Do students get the same amount of respect as teachers?
Usually, from what I've seen from my experience, teachers tend to not give as much respect to those kids that are troublemakers, only because they say he's trying to or she's trying to just be disruptive or this, and they use a certain tone of voice that tells the student, well, he's being mean, I'm gonna be mean back to this person, or he's not even paying attention, she's not even paying attention to me, and why should I pay attention to them?
Right. So sometimes teachers may expect respect because that's what's done in a school, but they may not necessarily give respect. Anybody have any reactions to that? Anybody have experiences with that, or want to add on to what Carlos is saying? Please go for it, Amy.
Along the lines of what Carlos was saying, a lot of times the community, whether silently or overtly communicated, the school system tells kids to sit down, be quiet, and parrot back what they're being told, rather than actually teaching them how to think for themselves and what to think for themselves. And it communicates that message by even down to how the desks are oriented in a classroom. There are all kinds of little messages sent to kids of, this is where you stay quiet and you do what we tell you to do, because that's what you're supposed to do.
Thank you for sharing that, Amy. And thank you, Carlos, for bringing that into the space. I want to hear from a couple more people. I like seeing these hands raised. Alicia, go for it.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. Like Carlos was saying, the teachers that don't earn the respect from, like, quote unquote, the troubled students, like, I understand like their frustrations and everything. But I think like there are like good teachers that are like in love with like the troubled students or the students that have like the roughest time, just because like they want to tend to them more because they know like there's more like going on like at the house or something. So
absolutely, yeah. I think that there are definitely teachers who really make an effort and who do show this mutual respect. It seems sometimes that I feel like sometimes we point those out because they're like exceptions to the rule, because of the way that respect is like something that students have to give teachers, but not all teachers like have to give students, even though there are a lot of them that do. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it just like goes to show that, I mean, there should be like a mutual respect, like either way. But I mean, again, like I do understand like why there isn't sometimes, or I mean, just like the motivation of being at school is probably not there as well. But yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate you bringing that up because sometimes it can be easy, I think, to focus on all of the things that are going wrong in schools because there's so much that, like, hey, we want to be able to provide kind of an alternative in mentoring these kids. But there are definitely a lot of teachers doing good work and who are dedicated and who are so important to build relationships with.
Right.
So thank you for naming that.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So I've got a few points here that I put down in terms of where respect maybe doesn't show up in schools. And I would love to hear any additional ones or any disagreements or anything like that as we talk about this together. So here's my list. It is not exhaustive, but in terms of the school system and respect, I put deficit thinking. And by that, I mean, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, but that's this idea of like teachers coming in thinking something's wrong with the students. I have to improve the students because they're not good enough yet. I think that can be a mindset that not everybody has. I think there's a lot of people who are building, you know, more resilience and more strengths celebration into what they do. But a lot of times school rules are built on that. I think that folks named what I'm calling naming and shaming in terms of singling out the students who are quote unquote the troublemakers, using that different tone with them, being, you know, ready to accuse them even if they're not doing anything wrong because they've misbehaved before. I think that shows a lack of respect. I think removing choices can sometimes be a lack of respect because kids are tiny, they're tiny humans. And so just like we want to be able to have choices in the things that we do, kids need a little bit of freedom as well. So even when they have to follow a schedule, if they have no choices in anything that they're doing and they're just stuck at school having to sit down and be quiet or, okay, do all of your homework right now, I think that can be a way of disrespecting them. I would add treating people and problems like the same thing. My motto is that there's no bad kids. You can have kids who are struggling or who you're having some trouble with their behavior, but that's not the same as a person being good or bad. I think those are words for what people, maybe words for what people do, not what they are. And lastly, and I know a lot of teachers are really trying to improve on this front, but microaggressions and plain old aggressions definitely show a lack of respect when people think that something's wrong with a student's culture, with a student's language, with the way that a student speaks. Those show, hey, you're not worthy of respect. So these are all things that we really want to challenge if we have this foundation based on restorative justice. I'm wondering if anyone would want to add any places where they see respect missing from our school system, or ways that they see respect showing up really well. What comes up for you as I share out some of these points?
Something came up for me, and that would be refusing to hear a student out. I've seen it with like other tutors and even teachers. They refuse to hear the child's side of the story. And I feel like for anybody, especially a child, if you're super angry, you just want to convey how you feel and express what you're feeling in that moment. And for someone to not even bother to listen, it just makes the problem worse. And I know it can like kind of break them a little bit. So I feel like that belongs on the list.
I would say definitely. and we'll actually talk about that one in a couple slides because I put it down for another piece of this. But I just, to clarify, you're talking about like, oh, I don't care why you're mad, just, you know, do what I say. Is that the kind of attitude?
Yeah, you know, a child maybe did something disruptive or did something they weren't supposed to, and without even hearing their side of the story or maybe why they did that, you know, just shutting them out and giving them some type of punishment.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
Go for it, Amy.
Just to add and that to add to that, just so that we can be clear with everyone, that's not the same thing as saying, let's talk about this later too, right? It's okay to tell a student, I want to hear your story, but we can't do, you know, we can't do that right now. Let's do that later. And work on that and. I said, but it's supposed to be and. I want to hear you out. I want to hear your side of the story, and we will talk about it later, okay? It's okay to do that. It's not okay to say, I don't want to hear it, right? Like our parents, how many of you, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you, your parents are like, I don't want to hear it, right? They already knew what happened. I don't want to hear it. Go to your room, right? So that's what we really want to avoid, is how, whether it's through body language, through facial expressions, through whatever, communicating to a child, I don't believe you and I don't want to hear you right now.
Thank you for adding that, Amy. And I see in the chat, Abigail says, I would say in the grading system, students with the better grades get the praise and students who don't have such a good grade would be ignored or given the tags of not such a good student. Yeah, kind of bringing in that bias. If you have had a student who's struggling, starting to maybe assume, oh, I'm not going to call on them, or they're not going to give good answers, or they don't, giving them less praise and focusing on things that they did wrong. All of those things kind of go against this core restorative value of respect. So we want to make sure that we're challenging them as we go through and as we plan things. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, Amy, because it doesn't, I know how hard it is to be at a site and have like 50 things going on at once. And maybe it isn't a good time for a one-on-one because you and your other tutors are trying to really supervise, and there's a lot of kids who need things all at once, but making sure, okay, I got to make time for this later, or I do care what you have to say. I think that's the biggest thing, is communicating that you care what someone has to say. That's respect. So thank you all for your wonderful additions to that. And I'm just going to put a quote up here for us to sit with. You may agree with it or you may disagree with it. And either way, that's fine. We're going to do this for each of these R's as we just talk them through. So here's our quote. It is from Angela Davis, well-known activist. And she said, when children attend school that places a greater value on discipline and security than on knowledge and intellectual development, they are attending prep schools for prison. And that's a heavy quote. Does anybody have any reactions to that or want to sit with it for a minute? Reminded of high school. If you're comfortable, can you share a little about that, Kellen?
Well, if I think about it, I only live like a few blocks away from my high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never changed. There's always fencing, like very tall fencing. Everything's like blocked off. There's wires. What is it? What are those things called? Barbed wires everywhere. Security cameras everywhere. Heavy security presence. And we had a whole department dedicated to discipline. And it received the most funding and the most attention. And a lot of the students were afraid to speak out on it. And so we had like this whole riot go out in the school because that's how they felt.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability and for sharing that story. I think this is something that shows up in schools and in lots of places where it really can be very focused on, even I think there are a lot of really good teachers working within this system, but a lot of times it can be very focused on control. A lot of times it can be focused on learning how to follow rules and be obedient, not in ways that are, I want you to be safe, I want you to be healthy, I want this, but just rules for rules' sake. And I think that really undermines this idea of respect. And it can, I think when she says they're attending prep schools for prison, it kind of sets them up sometimes later in life to be struggling, to not have freedom or choice. And it also really points to, I think, a lot of the systemic problems that go on within the school system and the things that we want to challenge. So since that's such a big part of restorative justice, I wanted to touch on it. Any other reactions? Feel free to share in the chat. I really hear that you're all thinking about this, and I'm really grateful for that. All right, we're gonna go to the next one. Relationships. So here's our questions. You can answer either one of them or both. So what kinds of relationships does the school create? And how important is it to connect personally with students? And I would like to hear from a few voices I haven't heard yet, if you are willing to make space, take space. Go for it, Lauren.
I think it's the most important thing. It's to do that first and foremost. I think that yesterday that students don't learn from those they don't like, and that's so true. I feel like they really want to impress you and work with you when they know you and like you, and I think it's so important. Even the students who I really developed like a close relationship with, just for them to have a person they could tell stuff to was so important for them, and I'm so grateful I had that opportunity. So I think that's the number one most important thing.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Lauren, and for bringing in that personal experience. Go for it, Abigail.
Are you guys able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
Loud and
so
clear.
I feel like it's really important for a teacher or like to connect with the students so they can get along with each other, like know each other. In case like there's a problem happening, they can have the trust and tell you something that's going on, like whether it's like in their life or like house problems, and they just be vulnerable to let you know what's going on, and you can help them much better.
Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to add one other question to this. And I really want to hear some thoughts on this because it might be, we might all have different perspectives. So how would you describe the relationship between a teacher and a student, or a teacher and a class? How's that relationship similar or different from maybe students' friendships, from family? I see two more. Alicia, go for it.
Yeah, I think like a relationship with a student and a student, like as if they're friends, I think that's completely different than a student and a tutor, or like a student and a teacher, just because there has to be some kind of a like professionalism like with the tutor or teacher, because I mean at the end of the day, like you're their tutor or teacher, and like you guys aren't like not like friendly, but not like, you know, BFFs or something.
Mhm.
So I think that's like really important, kind of just to keep that boundary, just because like to protect yourself and them, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The boundary is really, really important. So thank you for sharing that. And I see in the chat a few interesting responses. I see that it's mentor mentee. And I also see how it depends on how the teachers are. Indira or Rachel, could you add to that kind of it depends?
Yeah, because I feel like some teachers are like kind of different, because I think I remember from some other training that we mentioned that like I think you guys asked us like what teacher like stuck out to you the most or something like that. And there was like a couple of them. So there was like the funny teacher, the one that just goes there and teaches, and like there was just different other ones. So I feel like it would just depend on how they are and how open they are, how open they're willing, how much they're willing up to open up to the student. That's how I feel.
Yeah, definitely. And it depends. And I'm sure, raise your hand if you've ever had a teacher that you know, like, oh, I'm just there for the paycheck. I don't really care that much
Yeah.
about the students.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had a couple teachers like that, and that made me not want to build a relationship with them just because they're like, oh, like I'm just here for the money, blah blah blah. And yeah, so
Mhm.
I feel like it just depends on like how they are and like how yeah, how they are pretty much.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like, yeah, for the people here, it is important to connect personally with students. And when you have those passionate teachers or those caring teachers, those are going to be the ones that students are going to come to talk about trauma, or to say, I don't feel safe at home, or confide and really have those, really become those mentors. So it's definitely important. So relationship is really about safety. Safety and trust. And we're going to look at some ways that trust might sometimes be missing from the classroom setting. So in terms of relationship, first one that I would say would be the students are expected to listen, but they don't really have a reason to do so. The like, I'm the teacher, you're the student, do what I say, kind of a mentality. And then also like crowd control, like students are numbers and not names. So you don't necessarily get to know them because they're all, you know, split up, or, oh, I'm just leading this group of people, but I don't know any of them. I would also add broken promises. If you're promising something to a student and then can't follow through, whether that's, oh, I'm going to help you later, or whether that's anything really, that makes a difference. And that happens with check-ins too. If a student thinks that you're going to check in and you don't. And then the last piece that I would add to this a lot of times is that relationship and connection get addressed. But in my experience, it's mostly been when students are misbehaving. That's when you go in and say, hey, I care about you and we got to change some things, and you do that intervention. But if the students are behaving well, maybe they're not getting as much of that relationship. Any reactions or things that people want to add to this? I think respect goes along with it. So that's why I don't have things in here like, you know, insulting students or making them feel less than, because these respect and relationship and all are kind of tied together. What I really heard in our conversation was that respect is kind of, or not respect, relationship and connecting and being a mentor, it doesn't happen automatically. Teachers really have to work at it if they're going to build those relationships. And a lot of times the ones who really do, who are passionate, who are caring, we almost name them as like exceptions to the rule, because it's not written in there, oh, okay, you have to connect with your students, you just have to teach the lessons, can a lot of times be an attitude that people have. So I'm gonna keep the chat open, keep looking for hands, but we are gonna move forward with our quote, like we have one for everything. Here's your quote. You already heard it. Kids don't learn from people they don't like. And I kind of want to think about this throughout the year. When you're working with a student and they're not listening, or they're not learning, or they're, back turn shutting down. Are you being someone that they can like and that they can trust and who feels safe? And sometimes that does mean looking at tone or looking at posture or all of those little things that kids pick up on, especially kids who have gone through trauma. I really recommend this TED Talk for people if they have a chance to look at it. It's called Every Child Needs a Champion. And Rita Pearson does an amazing job talking about this and what it really means to build that relationship, because it looks different with everyone. They're more excited when they have fun around you and feel safe with you. And we'll talk about safety on during our lab. So we'll be able to really dive into that and think about, what does that look like? What does that mean that we're doing? All right, moving forward, we're gonna do responsibility, and then I'll check in and see if y'all need a brain break. So, all right, responsibility. Let's do another 3, 2, 1 in the chat. Shake your hands out. And in 3, 2, 1, share a couple words. What does responsibility mean to you?
Ooh.
Keeping a promise, show up, be prepared, be committed, doing what you got to do, being accountable. Can you share a little bit, Elena, about what you mean by being accountable?
It's not saying something that you don't mean. Like you say something to a student, and then later, like, you don't like, I don't know how to say it. But
I think,
just
yeah.
yeah.
I'm hearing that if you say something, you need to follow through. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's have a couple of people, and this time let's cold call. So how did you learn, I'm gonna say in school or at home, you can choose, about responsibility? Can you volunteer a couple people, Amy?
Let's go with Angel.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello? All right, it's working now.
There
Can
we
you
go.
repeat that again, please? Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. How did you learn in school or at home about responsibility?
I used to learn about responsibility, just, if I'm honest, like maybe some consequences that would have happened if I didn't keep something, or if I told somebody I would do something and then later out being called out on it. I learned to be responsible just by, like I put in the chat, keeping a promise. It was
Keeping a
always me
promise.
saying, I'm gonna do it. I got it. Don't worry. And if I didn't keep that promise, then I would feel really bad if I didn't. So
You'd feel bad, and there would maybe be a consequence.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And let's have one more person.
I have, let's see, Joanna Razo.
Are you there, Joanna? Whoops. Let's get one more.
All right, how about Isabel Alvarez?
Can you share, Isabel, how you learned in school or at home about responsibility?
For me, responsibility was more like the way you speak onto your actions, or if your actions meant what you were trying to say. Because you can say that you're gonna do something, but in reality you don't, or you just kind of procrastinate in it. And responsibility is like taking, like I don't want to say like be responsible if it's already like in the word, but kind of just if someone tells you, did you do this, like be honest and just like kind of own your actions. I feel like that's responsibility. So I kind of learned in school, like if let's say like you got caught cheating on a test or something, like you have to be like, yes, I did that and I won't do it again, and actually mean it. And then at home, let's say it would probably just be kind of like the basics about like doing chores, and if you didn't do something, like just do it next time type of thing. But yeah, that's kind of how I learned about responsibility.
Thank you for giving those examples. I appreciate it. So I'm hearing a lot of people learned about responsibility because there were consequences if they didn't own what they were doing. If you're cheating and you don't get caught, and then you get caught, you're gonna have to own up to it eventually. And also being honest about things that maybe weren't done that needed to be, and coming up with plans for how to be better in the future. So in terms of talking about the school system and responsibility, I think a lot of times one piece of this would be where people are targeting problematic behavior. So like, hey, don't cheat, or don't, maybe at supper, you're taking food, don't take food, but maybe ignoring the root cause. There's always a reason that a behavior is happening. And so while we don't want to just say, oh, that's, you know, let's take excuse after excuse, we do want to better understand the behavior. And that kind of goes along with what we were talking about a few minutes ago in terms of I don't want to hear it. There is always a reason that things happen. Apart from that, I think that punishment without alternative choices doesn't really change behavior. It teaches kids not to own up to things, but not to own up to things because it's the right thing to do, but because they're afraid of the consequences or what's going to happen, like you mentioned with consequence, Angel. I know that was true for me, that I would just be afraid of, oh, I'm going to get in trouble if someone finds out that I didn't do my homework. So then I would lie about, oh, I already did it, instead of making an alternative choice or learning to own up to things. I think sometimes with responsibility, there can be this idea of willful ignorance, like, oh, this student is just, they're choosing not to follow, they know the rule and they're choosing not to follow it, when maybe the student really needs something. Maybe a student who's being disruptive, who we're viewing as attention seeking, really needs connection, really needs someone to talk to. And maybe homework time is not the right time for it, but it's not right to just say, oh, that student is taking advantage, or, oh, that student is hogging attention. And then we already talked about this one. A lot of times, I think within traditional school systems, there's not really a space for honesty of like, oh, well, I did that because I was angry, or I did that because I was stressed out. When the answer is, I don't care why it happened, don't do it again. Or if it's don't talk back to me, again, that student doesn't get to speak out. They don't get to own their actions because we're focused on stopping the action. So I think responsibility really ties into understanding in that way and why things happen. And this quote is from, oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember what NASDE stands for. It's a special ed organization. So Tom Herner says, if a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. But if a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach, punish. Why can't we finish the last sentence as automatically as we do the others? National Association of State Directors of Special Education. Thank you so much, Lauren. What are your reactions to this quote? And even more than that, what do you think it looks like to teach someone how to behave? Anyone have any thoughts?
Definitely not through being punitive, but modeling is something that I feel like we could use more when it comes to behavior.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Yes.
Can you give me an example of what modeling looks like for you in tutoring?
I think for me, especially when we're playing board games, like if I lost, like having a good attitude. If we're playing a game, especially like sports, like I definitely wasn't good at those with the kids, but I'd try and I would lose. And I would model like having an appropriate reaction to that, because a lot of the kids struggled with that. So that's one area where I would.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. And maybe if you did lose and you were upset, being able to own up to that afterwards and say, hey, you know, I didn't act as well as I thought as I should have, or as would have been right. And really starting to repair that yourself as well. Amy, go for it. And then I thought I saw Elena, but I think you put your hand down.
So I've shared this story before. I don't know if it was here or not. But I actually had an instance this last school year where I was talking to a student and I swore it was them that had done something. And I kind of, called them out because I had already said something to them privately. And then come to find out later, I found out it wasn't actually that student. So in front of everyone, I apologized to the student. And I said, I owe you an apology because I blamed you for something that was not your fault. And I apologize. And I think it's very important. Number one, teachers that I had never apologized to me when they were wrong, right? Never did they apologize when they were wrong. And even now, I know I've heard stories of teachers who are like, okay, well, maybe I wasn't right that time, but I'm sure there'll be another time, or I'm sure you deserved it, right? They have that kind of attitude. Maybe they don't say that, but they have that kind of attitude. And I think it's really important for us to be the person in a child's life to say and to model it, like how they should respond, right? Because their parents don't respond that way. But let's be real, parents get really frustrated, right? They're working, they're coming home, they still have to cook and clean and all this. And so parents are often like, whatever. And, and teachers are doing the same thing. And it's every aspect of the students' lives. They're getting kind of this, well, I don't care if I was wrong. I'm never wrong. I'm always right. And that's not a healthy way to learn how to apologize and to learn how to repair harm when it has happened.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm hearing that, a big part of this, I think, for us, for tutors, for any part of the KEEP team is being comfortable with being wrong and being able to say, hey, I made a mistake, whether that's with students, whether that's with each other. That's a really big part of responsibility here. even as we have that integrity and that following through and that that accountability, you know, hey, I said I would do this and I did it. So I really want to encourage you to think about what it means to teach someone to behave and how that's different from punishing. And when I've listed, you know, these problems or things that sometimes go on within schools, I want to challenge you to think of, how can I be a counter to this in KEEP? So if it's ignoring the root cause, well, how do I do things differently? I think that's something to talk about in teams. I think that's something to continue to talk about throughout the year. Anything really. Now, in the spirit of respect, it's 2:19. We're going till 3:30. And I would like to check in with all of you in the chat and be respectful of your time. Would you prefer to have a quick brain break, stretch break, water break now, or would you prefer to just keep going? You good to keep going, Jess? Keep going. Keep going. Good to continue. All right. All right. I'm going to keep going then. Cool. Okay. So we're going to do our last 2 R's. Here we go. These are the ones that I think are a little bit not necessarily harder to understand, but I feel like they're not quite as automatic. Like respect, relationship, responsibility are like the 3 core ones. And here are our last 2. So repair. Let's share out in the chat answers to any of these questions. How do you respond when someone hurts you in a relationship? How do you respond when you hurt someone else in a relationship? And what happens in school when one person hurts another? And you can give your own examples or things that you've noticed or seen. So let's take a minute to sit with these questions and reply when you're ready. Own it, apologize, and make up for it. Awesome, that really ties into responsibility. What does it look like, Jose, to make up for it? Can you give me an example?
By trying to somehow, you know, right your wrong, you know, taking initiative. But yeah, like just making sure it doesn't happen again.
Making sure it doesn't happen again. Awesome.
Repair it and don't wait on it. Try to do it as soon as possible too.
Thank you. And Jess, I hear when you're truly sorry, your actions prove it. Yeah, I like that a lot. And your actions might not be, oh, you know, this is changing right away. Maybe it's a longer term thing, but it's making the effort to keep repairing. So let's look at the third question. What happens in school when one person hurts another? Trust or respect is lost. Awesome. And how do, you know, teachers or administration or principals respond? What happens? Sometimes they're sent to detention. And Rachel, in your opinion or your perspective, and asked to forgive and forget. I'm going to ask both of you, Rachel and Jorge, do you think, or how much do you think that being sent to detention or being asked to forgive and forget actually repairs the relationship or repairs the harm that's done?
For the detention one, I feel like it's completely damaging to the person being punished because it teaches them that there is no room for mistakes. And when those mistakes are made, you are publicly shamed for it. You're publicly humiliated for it. And I guess it just doesn't leave room for improvement. It just leaves you fearing.
And yeah, it just kind of, it would put both of those people in a stalemate, right? Like, oh, hey, you were both fighting, you both get detention. That doesn't do anything to change the relationship between them. I want to hear from you, Jorge, about and same as parents being called. Thank you, Kayla. I want to hear from you, Jorge, about forgiving and forgetting. Does that repair relationships? How much do you think that repairs relationships?
I don't think.
Sorry, I'm trying to get better at open-ended questions.
That's perfectly fine. I don't believe it really does anything to heal the relationship between the students, especially if there was an issue between them, because the person who was maybe creating the conflict gets off scot-free with, you know, an apology, and sometimes it's a very public one because all they really do is just set them aside, like next to the door, or telling each other, it's like, hey, it happened. We got to go continue our math lesson. Like, it kind of just bottles up emotions and doesn't allow either side to be heard or be repaired.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to even add one more that you made me think of as we talked about this, which would be separating students. Like, hey, you're friends, you're fighting. I need to put you apart from each other. Sometimes that may be necessary in terms of like safety, but I don't think by itself it repairs relationship. It doesn't look at what happened, look at what the connection is like between those people, help them to understand each other. It's one of those crowd control things. So I'm hearing a lot of this being students that are having conflict with each other being treated as like, oh, you're both, you know, quote unquote, equally guilty, both being publicly punished. And yeah, that it puts this stalemate between people. So let's look at a few other examples of repair, or where repair doesn't happen. So one might be with punishment, like with a detention or with sitting on the bench at recess. That might temporarily stop behavior, but it doesn't repair the harm. Maybe that harm is between two students. Maybe that harm is to the community, something like vandalism. Punishing someone doesn't repair what harm has been done. In terms of school system and restorative justice and repair, I would also say a lot of times teachers don't need to own up to harm or mistakes as much. That kind of goes along with what we were talking about with responsibility, because, you know, some of that harm is okay if it's coming from school personnel. If it's, well, I was right, or you needed to be listening, so it was okay for me to raise my voice. Those sort of things. I would also add that if a student does kind of have some ongoing hurt going on between, you know, someone who has harmed them, sometimes they get told, don't be so sensitive, or just toughen up. And lastly, a lot of times conflict gets automatically viewed as bad, when if it's properly handled, it might be an opportunity for growth and for understanding people. So feel free to keep talking in the chat, but I am going to give us our quote. Rupture is inevitable and repair takes work. So in this quote, what would you, when I say rupture, what does that mean to you? Does anybody know? Anybody want to give a guess? Broken relationship. Thanks, Amy. Yeah. So if a broken relationship is inevitable, it's always going to happen. There's always going to be, even with the people that we care about the most, at least in my experience, there's sometimes going to be conflict. There's sometimes going to be misunderstanding. But I think it's really what you do after the fact. It's really what you do to repair the harm or repair the relationship, that strengthens it. So with this one, I really want to say, like, I'm not asking anybody to go in and say, I'm going to be 100% perfect. I'm going to be a superhero, and I'm never going to make mistakes with students. I'm never going to break relationship with students. I'm never going to realize, oh my gosh, I broke a promise. But when that happens, because it will happen, it's happened to me, it'll happen to you, that repair takes work. And I want to ask that people be committed to that repair. Any reactions to this one? Go ahead, and we're going to keep going because you said to keep going. I hope that you all are taking these quotes to heart and just having them be ways to stick these R's into your mind. That is what they're intended for. So lastly, we'll do reintegration. So we're going to focus on the first question for this, because we've talked about how you work through harm that someone else has done. So in your opinion, how important is it to belong to a community or a group? And just for variation, let's do a cold call.
Okay. Hang on, I'm having computer problems. There we go.
No worries.
Trinity.
So Trinity, in your opinion, how important is it to belong to a group or a community?
It's very important to have a sense of belonging. I think it helps you step out of your shell and be more comfortable expressing how you genuinely feel. Also, it's nice to get a different opinion. I feel like if I was doing something solo or not in the group setting, I would be so one-sided and single-minded. So having that group belonging, it really allows you to gather other opinions and other perspectives.
Awesome. And one more cold call. How important is community or group belonging?
Cassandra.
Are you there, Cassandra? I can't hear you. Okay, the question is, in your opinion, how important is it to belong to a group or a community?
Hopefully you can hear me because my Wi-Fi is kind of all over the place, but
I can hear
I
you
think
now.
it's really, thank you. I think it's really important because that way you can expand your mindset. You're not really so close-minded, and also you just get to also share things about yourself.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't just improve you, but you get to share it with other people. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of agreement on that among people. Does anybody think that maybe it's not important to belong to a community? Any kind of community, whether it doesn't have to be like specifically like a school or a family or anything, but anybody think like, oh, we don't need other people. We're fine completely on our own. Anybody want to be a hermit in the woods? Depends on if they're not supportive. So, okay, so belonging to a supportive community. Alicia, go for it.
Yeah, I think I'll piggyback on that comment. That, and then I think some people are just okay being by themselves. I mean, whether like they travel alone or like whatever it is that they do, like they may feel like peace within that, and I think that's totally cool too.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's like I feel like everybody has like a certain amount of alone time that they need, and a certain amount of like other people or like social time that they need. And it's like if you have too much or too little of those, things get weird, is the way that I like to put it. Because I feel like people talk about introvert, extrovert, and it's like so simple. But I think on the whole, people really do need like some sense of belonging. Maybe it looks different for everyone. So thank you for putting that piece in there. Amy says, I want to be a hermit in the woods, but we all need some group belonging, so I'm not. Yeah, and that might be another good way to think about it. So when we talk about reintegration and bringing people back into a community, that's really important because separating them from support, from belonging, from feeling accepted does a lot of harm. Yep, we're social beings. Humans are social animals. That's exactly what I was going to say. So some ways that the school system doesn't necessarily support reintegration might be singling out students with the problematic behavior. Like, oh, that kid's the troublemaker. Another one that sometimes happens accidentally might be pitting students against each other in terms of competition that doesn't end up being healthy competition, in terms of, oh, why can't you be as good, Max, why can't you be as good as Abraham? Comparison to students. I think this idea of like bringing a classroom back to normal, let's just get back to what we were doing, might sometimes not support reintegration because it might be that change is necessary for a student to be brought back in. And then lastly, isolating misbehaving students from community, sitting in the corner or losing recess, like taking it away from them rather than them not wanting to do it. Those can all be ways that we maybe don't let those students reintegrate. Like they're always the quote unquote bad kid. And those are things that we really want to challenge. So we got our last quote here, and that is, need for connection and community is as primal and fundamental as the need for air, water, or food. And I like this one because to me, it really points to the fact that like at least some sort of connection is a need. We're social creatures. Just like maybe not everybody likes to eat a lot of food, but they still need some to keep going and to survive. And it really is just so basic to help these students feel like they belong. So even when they have caused harm, I think that is the most important thing here. Anybody have any reactions to this piece about reintegration or about community? You all are doing so great, and we are almost done. We got one more little section. All right, I will keep an eye on the chat and the participants. All right, so we've sort of talked about like, how do we do these things? Can we go over reintegration again? Yeah, anybody want to help out Jose and sort of explain what reintegration means? Just that part. Sure. Oh, sorry. Reintegration. Did you want to go over the definition of it, or did you want to go back to that slide? I'm sorry, I just missed your question. And I see some other questions in here.
Just like definition.
Yeah.
And maybe like an example or two, please.
Sure. So reintegration, when we talk about it as these 5 R's, would be letting the student become a part of the community again. If a student or individual, could be any kind of student. So rather than just separating someone and saying, you know, that's a bad person and we don't associate them anymore, associate with them anymore, how do we bring them back in? How do we support them, even with boundaries and agreements and respect? That's reintegration. Bringing someone back in. That is a really great question, Ernesto. And we're actually about to talk about it because it is going to depend. All right. So how do we bring RJ into our schools? We have started to talk about it. We are gonna mention really quick PBIS, because that is what's coming from the Pomona Unified School District. That's their attempt to bring some of these RJ values, this respect and this relationship into the schools. So anybody want to take a leap and explain to me what the different parts of PBIS are? We talked about this in training last year, but I know not everybody was at that training. Can somebody share out what they remember? And it's PBIS or PBIS, whichever is easier for you to say. All right, then I'm gonna do it. So when we're talking about PBIS, there's sort of 3 different tiers of it. So at the bottom, there's the expectations that teachers and principals and faculty are going to give to everyone. And that's prevention. That is, I'm being proactive, I'm framing things in this way, I'm building these relationships with students so that I can catch behavior before it becomes a problem. And then you recognize that not every student is good. That's not gonna work for every student. You're always gonna have a few who maybe need a little bit more support. And that would be kind of the secondary prevention. And oh, does this person need some extra reminders? Do I need to give them a little bit more support? And then at the third, you have students who really have special individual needs and need kind of a wraparound program of all kinds of specialists to help them out. So you have 3 tiers, and just recognize that everyone's going to need different kinds of supports. And that looks different at every school. Are some issues with PBIS. I mean, it is very individualistic, like you sort of mentioned just now, in terms of rewarding some students and not others. It can, in some cases, pit students against each other. So what we really want to do is we want to try and work with the PBIS systems that we're in, but bring those RJ principles into KEEP. And some ways to do that would be universal supports. We've talked about this before. I think we're going to continue to talk about it as we do classroom management and as we train with you. But a big one of those is positive framing. So that's the, avoiding saying the word no or don't, because then students are going to want to test the boundaries. So you're being proactive. You're saying, okay, everybody, hands to yourself, instead of, hey, don't bother other students. Since kids are young and they have different attention spans than adults, simple, memorable expectations are another big piece of that. Making sure that these rules are rules that they understand. If you say be respectful, what does respect mean? And maybe talking through it with them, just like I talked through it with you, so that everybody is really on the same page. Proactive reminders, recognizing that you may need to remind students, okay, we need to walk to supper instead of having to tell them in the moment. And praise for students, and which is positive reinforcement. I want to add to this one that should be a given. There should be things that you are praising your students for, regardless of like you should tell them, oh, I'm so glad that you pulled out your paper right now. But also, even if somebody is, it's important to find the positive in what your students are doing. regardless of what it is. And Amy, I see your hand is up and I really would love to hear from you because I think that you can add some good pieces to this.
Yeah, really quick. And I think you may cover this a little bit later in under rewards group versus individual, but I specifically wanted to get to Ernesto's question. As far as PBIS tickets don't, depending on the system that's set up with the school, don't usually pit students against each other unless you offer one ticket and whichever student wins gets the ticket, right? Usually PBIS rewards at the school system and on the school site have to do with them following the community guidelines. So there's a personal responsibility. So if a student isn't awarded a PBIS ticket, it's because they're not following the community guidelines, or they're not being caught doing so. So that's how the tickets should be used. If they're not being used that way at your school site, it's probably a good idea to let us know. Because that is something, if your school is a PBIS school, which most Pomona Unifieds are, they should, reward tickets should not be, used between like, hey, if you get your math homework done first, you get this PBIS ticket. That's not how they should be being used. They should absolutely be, you're following the community guidelines. I watched you pick up that piece of trash. All right, here you go. Here's a ticket. I watched you help that student pick up their books. Here's a ticket. Here's a reward ticket. Every student has the opportunity to earn tickets based on their own actions. That's not pitting students against each other.
And I think that when we talk about pitting students against each other, also that's the like, oh, this person got a ticket and you didn't, which can be potentially harmful. If
Right.
I'm understanding you right.
And I get that. In that case, students need to fully understand the expectations that have been set. So in that case, if a student's upset that they didn't get a ticket, my question would be both to the student and to the staff, have we communicated what the expectations are for winning a ticket, for gaining a ticket? And does that student understand those expectations? Because if they don't understand that the expectation is if you do this positive behavior, you're going to get a ticket, then they're going to get that harm. They're going to be like, well, why not me? Okay, well, have you done this, or this? Have you been respectful? Have you been on task? Have you been attentive? If you have not been those things, that's what we give tickets for, right? So that's the kind of thing. And it can get a little dicey when you get into especially attention. I think was one of the ones at Lexington, being attentive, and you have students who have ADHD or any other neurodivergent behavior. So it's really up to the individual giving out the ticket to kind of slide a little bit back and forth and based on what students need and accommodations students need. That's how PBIS should work in theory.
Thank you for adding that. And I think that you had some things, I feel like when we talked about this and planned this, you had some thoughts on praise for students and the fact that that's a given. Can you give some examples of how that might look?
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about, anything from, let's say you have a student who is so disorganized and they always lose their homework because they're disorganized, right? Rather than coming at this from the perspective of, oh my gosh, you're so disorganized, we need to fix this. What you want to point out is maybe one area where they are organized, right? Oh, hey, your homework is in your binder. That is awesome. That's a great job putting your homework in your binder so you didn't lose it. That's awesome. Maybe not even adding the so you didn't lose it because that's a little qualifier. Don't do that. Do as I say, not as I do. So things like that for homework specifics, right? You want to find any little thing that you can to highlight the good things that the student is doing rather than say, hey, we need to fix this. Hey, this is what we need to fix. The first thing you want to do is say, hey, you did a great job, right? And I had a student at Lexington who kept forgetting to put their name at the top of the paper, and then they would get everything wrong. And so one day they remembered to put their name at the top of the paper, and I was like, hey, you got your name in the right spot. That's awesome. That's wonderful. And I was not being sarcastic. I was not sarcastic. I was very genuine. You got your name at the top of the paper. You remembered to do that. That's awesome. And the student actually, like, you could tell, like, their face kind of smirked in an upward motion, in a smile a little bit, because they were like, oh, hey, you know. So you want to find anything you can, even if it's, you know, a student's a really good soccer player or a good basketball player, but they're really bad at homework. Don't tell them they're bad at homework. You know, say, hey, I noticed you on the field the other day, you know, playing soccer. That's great. Hey, when we get to math, I can help you out with some soccer, you know, soccer math, right? Like learning to do soccer math. If you need help with that, let me know. But those are the kinds of things where you want to find any little thing that you can praise a student for. Maybe it's, hey, you haven't missed any classes. You haven't missed any tutoring. You've been here every day this week. That's awesome. I'm so glad you're here. That kind of stuff.
Thank you for adding that. And that really goes into this building relationship because, again, students don't learn from people they don't like. So a lot of times being able to give those positives, maybe somebody has gotten a whole bunch of answers wrong on the worksheet that they're doing. But even you just see, hey, I know you're focused and I know that you're really trying. Thank you for that. Can be a positive. It doesn't look like, oh, I'm rewarding these wrong answers, but I am rewarding effort. And that's really important. So I'm gonna challenge everyone to keep doing that. Let's see, moving forward, one thing that we're gonna talk about and that we're actually gonna do together is create a group agreement. And I strongly believe that having these group agreements that you put together, that you make together, is a form of bringing RJ into the classroom because it shows respect. Hey, we're going to agree on these rules together or these agreements together, and we're going to follow them. It's relationship building, and it is responsibility. It allows you to be able to own up if you do not follow the classroom agreement and to expect the same from the students. And it's also a relationship that is a little bit more equal than, hey, I'm the teacher, so here's the rules that I've made and you need to follow them or else. So that's a big thing that we're going to do next week when we do our labs. And let's see. I want to ask you really quick to think of a couple of agreements or rules that you have had at your school site, and make them some positive framing. Actually, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to come up with a few off the top of my head, like, let's see, how about walking feet? That's a good one. So I'm going to make one that's not positively framed, and I want you to reframe it. So let's see. Don't let's see. Don't fight. How can we positively frame that? Can we be nice, please? Speak kindly. I like that one, Erin. Thank you. Be kind to each other. And then maybe you're talking with the students. What does it mean to speak kindly? What does it look like to speak kindly? You've probably noticed me saying, what does it look like throughout this entire training? And that is because I think it's a little bit more, concrete than just respect or just, oh, treat people how you want to be treated. I think examples are really helpful. Good job. Let's please be respectful towards each other. Awesome. So I think people are having kind of a hang on positive framing. If this is confusing to you, or you're like, hey, I really need some practice with this, please reach out to me. I want to be able to talk with you about it. All right. And then lastly, PBIS or PBIS often does involve rewards. And sometimes those could be group rewards, or sometimes they could be individual rewards. So I think that the answer to how to do rewards, kind of going off of what Ernesto was saying, I think the answer is it depends. The things that I want you to think about are that we're a community-focused organization, trying to build stronger communities, relationships between people, being a little more collective. So think about what rewards are really gonna support that. Maybe it is everyone has an equal opportunity to earn something, and so that individual reward works. Or maybe you have a group of students who you struggle to do group rewards with because they because it does kind of pit them against each other, or they end up like calling each other out for little things and it's not really restorative. Think about what it means to be community focused. And you're gonna have some time to sort of develop what reward plans can look like, how you're going to really reinforce good behavior for these students. So when you have your sites partners, this is something to talk with them about. This is a place to bring up concerns of, oh, I don't want students to feel singled out. How can we avoid that? I do want to add within this sort of restorative framework, if a reward has to change, like, all right, we were gonna do this activity and now we're not because I don't think that we can handle it. Don't just leave it at that. It's a learning opportunity. So this would be a chance to discuss with them what needs to change in order to get this reward next week, for example. Maybe students do need to, maybe they didn't clean up after supper and they need to clean up in order to, just as an example, have a pizza party. That is what I want you to think about, that it's not, okay, now you're never going to get this reward again, because that's more of a punishment. It's about how they're going to learn, how they're going to change, and helping them follow through on that. And then lastly, on rewards, I want to say you're planning, you'll be planning that in sort of a vision for the school, goals for the school. And this is definitely a good time to figure out if you are a PBIS school, how are faculty using the tickets or the reinforcements? How does it work in comparison between, for example, your keep session and the classroom, and just to make sure that you guys are, or that you are all on the same page. So I bring these up just as questions and things to think about as the year starts, figuring out what's going to work and what might not, and how you can use them to teach important SEL skills. Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. In terms of further interventions, things that are important would be those one-on-one conversations and that relationship building, definitely helping students learn new skills, alternative behaviors, and looking for those opportunities to repair harm. Respect is always at the core of this. I strongly, strongly believe that people and their problems are two different things. Problems are something we experience, not who we are. And in general, I think that with these interventions, check-ins are really important to figure out, okay, why is the student behaving this way? But connection and check-in should be normal rather than like a punishment or something that students need to act out to get. So you want to sort of start to work strategically with your site partners to make sure that everyone's getting a little bit of check-in. Maybe it's not with the same tutor every day. Maybe you split the class up into thirds and you know, hey, these are the students I'm going to check on and I'm going to work with. Yeah, that's going to be sort of that piece. That check-in is normal, not just something students expect when they're when they think they're doing something wrong. Because otherwise they're not ever going to open up, you know? And then in terms of further supports, kind of mimicking that wraparound model, I want to bring in this idea that KEEP can't do everything and shouldn't. And I wanted to highlight a few of our other programs that may be helpful supports for our at Promise families. So one of those would be TREE. That's our parenting support and mentoring program. If parents are feeling overwhelmed, if they need help, we're not just working with kids. We also have the RJ and Care department, and they do a lot of work around the justice system, including juvenile justice. There's also PACT, which has intervention for students who are struggling with addiction, and they also, I believe, do referrals to counseling. And we have a huge number of local resources for support with immigration, mental health, civic engagement, food justice, etc. Because like we talked about at the beginning, people's circumstances often influence behavior and feelings and all of this. So if you have students who need further support or families who you know need further support, talk to your lead, talk to your captain, talk to coaching, talk to supervisors, because the sooner you reach out, the better. I would say that that's better for you in terms of stress and knowing that there's other people on it and you're not just, you know, holding up the world. And of course, it's better for students. And with that, I have this just kind of last quote, and it's education is understanding relationships. And that's from George Washington Carver. So I'm gonna share one of these videos and we're just gonna sort of watch it as our last little piece. But that's the core of what I wanted to get to. We build these relationships so that the education piece can come through. It's not necessarily the other way around. So here we go. I'm gonna new share. Keep day 2 training, share sound. And this is an example of a lot of these principles just put into practice and what that can look like. Sorry, here we go.
If I'm in a class and I know like me and the teacher don't really like connect, when they call me, I sort of get that like feeling, like if they're asking a question and they like call on me like, oh Eddie, like answer this question, like I get that ooh, like that nervous feeling. But like if I'm with the teacher that's like that I have a good connection with, like I'll feel like free to answer, like with no hesitation or anything.
Being able to like talk to your teachers or having that trust factor with different teachers or different students is like, it's a good feeling, because when you don't have them on the outside, you know, okay, I can come to school and I can get these resources, or I can get the help, or I can talk to this teacher or this person, and it makes you feel good and know that you have support.
I think the relationship with our teachers are super important, and I have a relationship with a lot of my teachers this year, and I think it's super important because like it makes you want to go to that class, it makes you want to learn, and it like kind of helps you take in what you're hearing from them like a lot more, because you like respect that person a lot more.
We're basically like just a community of people, and like that's how we function. Like that's the dynamic around here, you know what I mean? Like there's no discriminatory, like it's just, you know, like we all get along basically. It doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter like what race you are, none of that matters. Extracurricular activities, for example, like that really helps you build like a closer bond like with the students in the school. Like I do cheerleading, so you know it's definitely like fun, like seeing some of the girls, you know, outside of practice and like, oh, we interact, like, hey girl, what's up?
Students do better if they're connected to a community. And they also do better when they have relationships with people in the building.
So it's just a simple little video, and I know that it is with older students than we work with in KEEP. But I do think that it just really goes to show how powerful relationship can be, that even when you do have students who are like, oh, I don't want to talk, or I feel like I'm gonna shut down or not have these conversations, that just those little ways of being there go such a long way. So I hope that this training has really gone over and broken down ways to build those relationships, ways to bring RJ into schools. And I am open to keep talking about this. If anybody has any questions or wants to talk one-on-one, reach out. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little more about perspectives and working with students. We mentioned a bit of that, like finding strengths, finding positives. So definitely look forward to that. But I think that's going to be the end of our training for today. That is last. Well, I have one other video that kind of goes over relationships. They're both kind of similar. I can share this video with you later if you want, or we can watch it now. I know this has been kind of a longer day than yesterday. Anybody have a preference? Sure. Okay. Then let's watch this last video. Please share reactions, comments, questions in here, and we'll go from there. So here's one more, power of relationships in schools. And I think this one is with younger kids.
You had so much to offer yesterday. You okay?
I'm tired.
So what's going on?
Strong relationships are central to the learning process. What the science of learning and development tells us is that we need to create learning environments which allow for strong long-term relationships for children to become attached to school and to the adults and other children in it.
When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin.
Good morning, Ariella. How you doing today? The purpose of the morning greeting is to connect with them and to just make sure that I'm seeing them as humans. Like I'm making that relationship with them, making that bond.
I prioritize relationship building because getting to know them is the best part of the job.
When I come in the morning, we usually talk about things that are happening in our community.
We're trying to build caring and respect.
The teacher is trying to understand who I am and my values as a person.
When I have a free 45 minutes or an hour, I think to myself, I could sit down and catch up on grading, or I could go and make connections, whether it's a smile or a joke or a reminder. It validates their presence in the building.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human. When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath. My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
Total familiarity. When that student knows that you care about them, when they know that you're a human, let's think about that. Their academic performance in your class is going to be better.
If I'm comfortable around them,
then I'm more confident around them and it's easier to ask questions and things like that.
So when you're looking at this graph, what is it that you think happened?
Some teachers I don't always get along with the best, so then sometimes I'm like, I can't do it, so I'm just not gonna do it. But when I like the teacher, I want to do their work. I'll be like, I can learn this.
You all have done outstanding work.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning.
Good to see.
So that's our other video. Just a little bit more of kind of the science that goes on in those relationships and the psychology that goes on in those relationships. And the amount of impact that you can make by, you know, becoming a safer person, by keeping these different parts of our RJ and that mindset close when you are doing this tutoring. So I want to invite you to share anything that's coming up for you as we watch these. And that's pretty much the last thing that I have for y'all for training today. So any takeaway points, things that you want to put into practice this year, knowing that this is just kind of an ongoing commitment. For me, it's always, I think, incredible to hear the way that like building these relationships and helping people feel safe literally can change someone's brain. Especially when we talk about At Promise Youth and we talk about trauma and all of the pain that people have gone through. I think that there's really just a lot of power in that kind of connection.
If I can say something, I completely agree. It also, I think it's really beneficial, just I guess from my own perspective, that I am working with the At Promise Youth, you know, coming from a background of poverty myself. Like I genuinely feel like I can give them the most empathy, and it is really impactful. You know, sometimes I do have to stop myself when I'm at home and I'm worrying about students. I'm like, no, like it's gonna be okay. It's not my job to worry while I'm at home. But you're right, the relationships that you form and the connections you make, it's incredible. It's an experience you don't usually get anywhere else in another type of workplace, and it's really rewarding.
Thank you for sharing, Trinity. Anybody else have any share outs or reactions to these videos? Jose, please go for it.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Trinity said. I think it's really important to also, you know, show the kids that, hey, you know, we do come from the same background. A lot of us, like, you know, are actually from the same community. You know, we're alumni of this, you know, PUSD education system. So at least that's how I approach it. Every time I build a relationship with the kids, you know, I think it's really important to, like, you know, connect with them and show them, hey, like, I was just like you, like I am you, you know. So after seeing that, like a lot of us are like from Pomona and everything, like I think that should be the, not the icebreaker, but like the thing to lead, you know, towards making that relationship with the student. Like always point that out.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And especially for folks who maybe have come from the same school, because I know sometimes that happens. If you're ever being like, oh, I have no idea how to start making a relationship with students. And we'll talk about, you know, some ways to sort of start building that connection. That might be another one. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to share any thoughts or things that are coming up for them? Go for it, Amy.
I'm so grateful that they talk a lot about showing your kids that you're human. Because there are times when I would be talking to students and the wrong student's name came out of my mouth. And I stopped and I would look at that student and go, did I just call you so-and-so? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, I am so sorry. Like, but students would do that with myself and Paige Coultrip and I were at the same site. And then Paige wouldn't be there and they'd call me Paige or they'd call Paige Amy. I'm like, what? But so that they were comfortable making a mistake like that because I made a mistake like that and would apologize. I'd be like, I'm so sorry. And just making sure that they know that people make mistakes and the way we respond to mistakes can change how other people perceive us. So I love that the videos talk a lot about being human as a teacher and being human as an authority figure. Uh-oh, Paige raised their hand.
Go for it, Paige. And I see someone in the chat and I'll respond in just a minute.
If I could add on to that, yeah, there were many times when especially when we got new students in our program at Lexington, where I would mess up their names or forget their names or have to ask, hey, can you remind me of your name again? And that's kind of embarrassing as an authority figure. Like, hey, I should know all these things and be a good example for these students. But at the same time, it's a great opportunity to lead by example and say, oh, I apologize. I'll do better in the future to remember your name because your name is important to me. So it's like showing like that you respect the students, and B, like everybody makes mistakes. I make a lot of them, and then it's okay to do that.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah, I think it can be really hard in the moment, especially when there's so many like stressors coming at us. I know that's definitely true for me. I messed up your name and I'm trying to get homework done and I'm very stressed and I'm trying to, let go of that. But I think that like thinking about these values and ways to, create alternatives, for me at least, it gives me the permission to not be perfect. And I hope that you all can take that away, like, hey, here's some things I can grow on, but I don't have to be perfect. And Callan says, society expects us to present ourselves as perfect models and separating ourselves from personal connections with students to prevent distractions. For me, being real and present is new and hard to maintain, but worth it to see the overall growth with students. Yeah, definitely. And I think that there's kind of some hope in that, like, being real and being you in a restorative way is really just, it's like, it's necessary to this work. You don't have to put on, oh, this is my teacher Sona, and now all of the students I have to command respect from everybody. It's work that happens gradually. So letting in someone who just got disconnected. Awesome. Any other reactions, things that people want to share? What are you all going to take away from this training? Is there anything that stuck out to you that you're planning to really try to bring into tutoring this year? My goal was just to break down these R's and think about each one, because we'll name them off in order and say these are our principles. But I really wanted to just sit down and ask, what does it mean to be respectful in a classroom? What does it mean to build relationship in a classroom? So that we're all on the same footing as we move into the next couple of days and weeks and months. Allowing kids to see we as adults will make mistakes. Thank you, Jess. Yes, absolutely. Anyone else? More one-on-one relationship, not only group relationships. Yeah, and we'll talk about ways to make one-on-one relationships in group tutoring in, I think, our classroom management training. So don't worry, that's coming up. Thanks, Leslie. All right, well, I am going to stop recording.